Hello, everybody. Good evening. It is now 7 o'clock on Monday, February the 12th. Welcome. I so appreciate you taking your time to listen to this presentation and watch the slides. I'm very excited about this session. My name is Angela Covert. I'm with the MS Society of Canada, Ontario and Nunavut Division. My role is to provide educational opportunities, so I do encourage you, anytime you wish to reach out to me, that you do so if you have some suggestions as we move forward with education. I'm now going to introduce the presenters. They're going to do the session with both a video at the beginning as well as the PowerPoint that you can see on the screen. There is a little chat box or a question box that you can use to ask questions. Actually, if you don't mind using the question box, I can watch that a little bit better. And if you have a question, just type that in. We have received some questions prior to this session, so I know that Melissa and Catherine will answer those. So I'm going to introduce to you Melissa Graham, and she's going to probably start after the video. And I also have on the line Catherine Janiski, and I'm sorry if I got that wrong, Catherine, you can correct me. And what we'll do is, I probably did really get it wrong, didn't I?
It's Nikki, but that's fine.
Nikki, thank you. I get all sorts too. So I'm going to start with a video, so be patient, and I'm just going to take that right now. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to have Melissa, if you would like to start, and if you could just please show your slides again.
Can everyone see them now?
Yeah, I believe they can. Thank you, Melissa. Go ahead.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for letting us speak with you this evening. So this is a presentation about the Self-Managed Attendance Services Direct Funding Program. Myself, Melissa Graham, and my colleague Catherine Janicki are going to take turns speaking with you tonight. So first, just to start with a little bit about the independent living movement, which is the kind of the background and backbone of the direct funding program itself. It's part of how the Center for Independent Living Toronto is run, and the Center for Independent Living Toronto hosts the direct funding program as well. So the independent living movement believes that people with disabilities know their own needs and are capable of finding solutions to problems around disability issues. It also says that people can take calculated risks and make mistakes, and that it should be a focus on quality of life and not on a person's limitations. So that's just important to keep in mind because it's part of how the direct funding program was designed, and it's somewhat different than other forms of attendance services that you might be used to. So there are many different independent living resource centers across the province, operated by community boards of volunteers, and each must have a majority of persons with disabilities. Key staff positions at these centers are held by persons with disabilities, and there are 11 independent living centers in Ontario and 28 in Canada. The Centre for Independent Living Toronto is one of these resource centers. It is for persons with disability, run by persons with disabilities, and the Centre for Independent Living Toronto assists persons with disabilities to take control of their own lives and live independently in the community. The center has other core programs besides direct funding. We also do information and referral, peer support, independent living skills training. We also have the Attendant Service Application Center, which you might know as PIC application. And of course, there's less direct funding. So direct funding is an innovative program empowering adults with their attendant services, and attendants assist with routine activities of living such as dressing, grooming, and toileting. And on this program, employers become their own personal needs attendants. Catherine, do you want to take it from there a bit?
All right. Sorry, just waiting for the next slide. Oh, here we go. Okay, so eligibility for the program has a number of dimensions. So some of them are fairly basic. Applicants must be 16 years of age or older, a resident of Ontario, and must require attendant services due to a permanent physical disability. We do require that people need assistance with personal assistance with the body, so that includes at least one of the following: transferring, bathing, toileting, or dressing, and must have attendant service needs that have been stable over the past year. Because the funding for our program is fixed, and because it is a self-managed program, people are expected to work within reasonably predictable needs that don't fluctuate from day to day or week to week. All right, so another dimension of the eligibility criteria has to do with directing attendance. So people on this program must be able to schedule their attendance and make alternative arrangements if somebody's not able to show up. They must be able to source their attendants, hire them, train them, and manage them, and perform all the responsibilities of being an employer. And they must be able to manage and account for the expenditure of funds that are granted to them. So to apply for the program, we recommend that people go through the eligibility criteria and kind of do a little bit of a self-assessment. You can get an application by getting in touch with the independent living center that you're closest to, or you can go to our brand new website. Well, it's not brand new anymore, but it feels new. And you can download the application and the application guide directly from the website, fill it out, send it in. When we receive and process the application, we send a confirmation letter to everyone to acknowledge receipt. A word about the wait list. Our wait list is approximately 1 year right now before someone is called in for a selection panel interview.
Just a bit about the interview. So prior to the interview, each applicant is given resources and support to help them prepare. We want you to be really comfortable with both your needs before coming into the interview, but also have some knowledge and skills around that employment piece we talked about. But we don't expect people to know it before we talk to them. We give them those supports and resources ahead of the interview. And at the interview, each person is interviewed by 3 panelists, one from SILT as the administrator of the program, one from their local independent living resource center, and the third person is a local consumer of attendant services. So usually somebody on direct funding or another source of attendant services. And the panel decides that the person is eligible based on the eligibility criteria. During the interview, the panel will ask questions to determine the applicant's ability to be an employer and develop a budget. And some of the questions they might ask are things like, how and where would you advertise? What might your ad say? What questions would you ask during an interview? What are the payroll deductions that come off of an employee's paycheck? Or explain the process required when dismissing an employee. And these, again, are things that we will go over with you prior to the interview to make sure you're comfortable with them and you're getting in the interview on in your best foot, but you will be asked them during the interview as well. So we expect you to develop an understanding of these things prior to the interview. So new self-managers often have many questions when they become employers on the program. We provide a variety of resources. We have a financial startup kit. We have the self-managers network that you can use to connect to other self-managers, people on the program. We call it self-managers. We have workshops and newsletters. We have online resources and tools that are available through our website. But also we have staff in the office that can talk to people when they have more complex questions and things that they need help troubleshooting.
Okay,
So,
so some of the advantages to moving to the direct funding program, one is that people are able to hire people that they want based on their individual requirements. So you're able to hire an attendant who works well with you. Because they're your employee, you're in charge of them, so you can instruct people to work the way you'd like. You can schedule them the way that you'd like, so you can ask somebody to come at a different time if delivered services hours don't meet your schedule. You could ask them to meet you at work or in the community if that's where your needs are. You receive the funds monthly to manage the expenses of being an employer, and the program is portable throughout the province, so you could move your funding to Thunder Bay or to Ottawa if you wanted to pick up and move one day.
Catherine and Melissa, I do have a question that's just come in.
Mm-hmm.
If I can ask it now, it's, are we able to apply before these services will be required in order to get ahead of things so that at the end of the year, when they are required, then we'll have access to this funding?
That's a good question. We receive that question a lot. So it really has to do with whether or not somebody meets the eligibility criteria at the time of application. So if somebody is applying thinking, I don't need attendant services right now, but I will, we will not, unfortunately, be able to add them to the wait list. Everyone on the wait list currently requires attendant services, and there are hundreds of people. So at the time of application, people must meet the baseline eligibility criteria. Now, if they don't want to take advantage of the services right away, we have a very flexible wait list. So if somebody put in their application when they're eligible, didn't want to move forward at that time, they could always reactivate in the future if when the time came up it wasn't good for them.
Thank you. Please go forward.
All right. Okay, so here are some of the responsibilities of being a direct funding self-manager. So self-managers must be able to undertake the functions, responsibilities, and possible risks of being an employer. So because the legal and financial relationship is between you and the attendant, the self-manager is taking on that role. They must be able to manage their responsibilities on their own and not rely on anyone else to manage for them. It's important to note that this doesn't mean being able to physically perform everything, but able to direct and take responsibility for what they're directing. Self-managers report on a quarterly basis to our offices on their spending and budgets. And people must follow all CRA requirements, the ESA, legislation, as well as the Human Rights Code.
Sorry, it's Angela again.
Yep.
Melissa, if you can please close the box on your right-hand side using that little orange arrow, it appears that people can see it.
what?
So if you can just click on that little orange arrow. Sorry. Thank you so much for noticing
I didn't know
that.
I could do that. Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, everyone.
I appreciate that, and I thank you for making that comment because we're all new to this too. I trust it's now working. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. So here are some things about the program that are good to know. Some of these we've covered a little bit already. But the participant on the program is responsible for training their own attendants. One of the key ideas behind the program is the person who applies and is found eligible for the program is the expert in their own needs and should be able to train any person they hire and what those needs are. The funds must be used within Ontario, but are not restricted to one place. I think Catherine touched on this a little bit, but participants can use attendance services at home, in the community, and while traveling within the province. And the program can fund up to 7 hours a day, 7 days a week of attendant hours as required. But while I say that I wouldn't use it as your benchmark, we look at needs in terms of if you can describe that you need your needs in a particular way and it's efficient and it makes sense. That's what we look at. So under direct funding, participants may not hire or pay immediate family members, including parents, children, siblings, spouses, or the equivalent to provide services and this includes bookkeeping. Participants do their own attendant recruiting and hiring by advertising for staff and conducting interviews. Now, this can seem really intimidating for a lot of people that are looking on our program, because it's hard to imagine who's going to come work for you and respond to your ad until you actually get started doing it. But in a lot of cases, people get often more responses than they expect to and have to weed people down and figure out, okay, who do I actually want as my employees? That's part of it too. And we, of course, help people strategize around these things as well. If maybe they haven't placed an ad before or haven't done an interview, we talk with people about ways they might do that. Under most circumstances, direct funding would be a self-manager's only source of government-funded attendance services. So I know there was a question earlier, like, would I be getting the same thing as I would under CCAC, was one of the advanced questions that we got. Most of the time, we can, at the very least, match what CCAC is doing. CCAC and direct funding have a lot of what we cover is the same, but we can often meet somebody's needs a little more. We have a little bit greater flexibility that way. But the thing to keep in mind is that if you do switch to direct funding, it's a complete switch. It's not like other forms of attendance services that might supplement what you're getting from other PSW services or a replacement. But something good to know, if you're living in supportive housing while selected from the program, then you might be required to move in order to receive direct funding. And some people have been able to work this out in some cases. So if this is your situation, don't immediately let it scare you away from our program. I have worked with a few people recently who've been able to work this out with the place that they're living, but it's on a case-by-case basis. So we do need to tell people that this is a possibility and something you should be aware of when planning for your future needs or your current needs. One of the benefits of direct funding that we recognize is that people often see their family relationships improved. So participants and self-managers on the program often tell us that they've improved their relationships as family members because those family members get to go back to being family members. Catherine, did you want to pick it up for a bit? Sorry.
So some of the other benefits of being on direct funding, so because of the support of attendance services, some self-managers report becoming more involved in their families in a positive way. That means spouses being able to return to work and provide greater financial support rather than staying home and providing assistance. Children of adults with disabilities become more independent and have better relationships with parents. And overall, just a general feeling of increased control over services. So the idea that you're able to have this flexibility and this choice involved with something so essential allows for a feeling of independence and more options. And it's more individualized. It's not you trying to conform to a system, it's you picking the system for yourself.
These are just some quotes here. Sorry.
Yeah, we're both very eager to talk about the benefits. So there's also an increased level of satisfaction with the attendance services because these are people that you have selected, trained, and built a relationship with. The level of service that you're getting tends to be a little bit higher. Back to you.
So just to let you know, our funding is provided by the Toronto Central Local Health Integrated Network and operates within the guidelines of the Government of Ontario. I think Catherine just wanted me to say that mouthful. That's okay. Quite a mouthful of words there. But what the province has been increasing our funding base quite a bit. Last year, it increased our funding base by $5 million per year, and it did so in a couple of previous years before that. We're continually trying to shorten the wait list and starting people on the program as soon as we can. And this graphic here just sort of describes how the funding works. We get funding from the Ministry of Health through the Toronto Central LIN, which then comes to the center, which then comes to self-managers, people on the program. And this is how you can contact us. We've got our phone numbers there and our website for your information.
Are there any questions for Melissa and Catherine? I actually had some questions that did come in, and I apologize, Catherine and Melissa, if you did touch on some of these, just in case they got missed or they need to be reiterated. I will ask some questions, but I'm also watching for those who are on the line. So here's a question. Would you be willing to come out to a local meeting or would have staff or volunteers who could do so throughout the province? So for example, maybe an MS Society support group or at an education session.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So you heard that, ladies and gentlemen. So absolutely. So if you would like to consider them coming out to one of your support groups or education session, these slides will be, I can email them, correct? Can I use these slides to email them out, as well as the recording will be going out, which will have the slides?
Let me confirm that, but I'm pretty sure we can send that to you, yeah.
Okay, so the question I did just have come in is if the slides could be sent out. So if I get them, I will definitely send them out. In the meantime, you will get the recording, which will have the slides. So you might be able to just quickly work your way through the recording. I was wondering if we have to pay, and I think you mentioned this, about WSIB or insurance, etc., to protect the PSW if they should get hurt, etc.
Yes, there are a number of they're called mandatory employer-related costs that each self-manager pays into. WSIB is one of them. Every person's budget has an amount on top of wages that's added in so that people can cover those costs. So when people receive the amount for however many hours they have times our wage, we add 18% on top of that so they can cover employer contributions to EI and CPP, WSIB, public holidays, things like that.
Okay.
We don't expect people to pay out of pocket for those costs.
Yeah. Well, both the individual, the PSW, as well as the employer, correct? Yeah. So I am assuming, and hopefully I'll get this question correct, I'm assuming that we have to get an employee account with CRA, similar to if you have a nanny account.
That's true. So people do have to register with CRA.
Okay. And what is the average hourly amount that is generally expected to be paid? And outside of taxes, what other deductions need to be considered?
Okay. Well, our maximum wage right now is $19 an hour. And the deductions you would see off that would be any deductions you would normally see off a paycheck in Ontario. I know a question did come up earlier of whether their attendants would be invoicing people on the program. That's not actually how it works. It's by payroll. The people you hire as attendants are your employees. So the things you're going to take off the deductions are the same as you would for most employers in Ontario, employees rather. So it'd be things like CPP, EI, and income tax would come off the paycheck.
Okay. Any questions online yet? If not, I've got a couple more here. So let's suggest if you were to come out and about and speak about your program, do you have anybody from the MS community who you have ever used either as an ambassador or someone who would present their own story? Or do you have stories of somebody with MS, or any examples you can give?
That is a good question. I know we have quite a number of people with MS on the program. And I'm sure some of them would be happy to come up and speak to folks. I don't know that we would ever specifically set it up that way at an information session, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't. Because obviously we got to consider the time and availability of the people that are available to present with us. And sometimes it doesn't work out, but that's something we could consider for sure.
Very good, thank you. Question from those who are watching now. Who generally applies for the position of a PSW? What are the pros and cons for the attendant and for the paid caregivers? And I might add to that is often what type of training do they come to the table with? So how are they prepared for these positions?
Well, I'll answer this question on one dimension, and Melissa can probably answer on another. So one of the benefits of this program is that people do not have to hire anybody with specific training. Because the eligibility criteria, part of it is that somebody can train an attendant in their specific routines. Somebody doesn't have to come to the table with a PSW certificate or even necessarily previous experience. We have a colleague who tends to hire like artists, writers, people who are, you know, a good fit with her personality, and they can be trained to do what she needs to do. That being said, some people are more comfortable hiring people with specific experience or specific credentials, and that's absolutely fine as well. So you do have a wide range of flexibility in who you hire, and the pool of applicants that you get will largely depend on what kind of things you say in your ad. So Melissa, I'll let you add on to that question because I'm sure you have more to say about that.
Okay, so I'm on the program as well as working for the program, and for myself, I prefer not to hire PSWs. It's a personal preference that I have, and it works out well with the shifts and the routines that I have. So I've been on the program now, I think, for 4 years. I have 2 regular staff, but one has worked for me now for over a year, and the other one has been with me close to 3 years. And neither one of them are trained PSWs, but they both do their jobs really well. And now, like I said, part of that is personal preference, and part of that is, you know, some people choose to have a mix of PSWs and non-PSWs depending on the type of work that person will be doing in their shift. Say if it's a bowel routine shift or if they're helping out with catheterization, some people prefer to hire somebody with previous expertise. But the thing about our program is you're not required to. And for someone like myself who works during the day, finding someone that can come to me at 6:30 in the morning and lives down the street is a lot easier for myself and for the attendant too than finding someone who might be a trained PSW but may not always be able to get to me as something that I experienced with previous services.
Appreciating that everybody is different and your needs are different. Do you have somewhat of a templated advertisement that people can go by to use when advertising and key things to remember when either advertising or the steps of the program, etc.?
The short answer is, sorry.
When they're placing a job ad for attendants?
Yeah, we'll start with that. Is there any kind of templated job ad, given again that there's flexibility because of the differences that people would require?
Do you want me to take that one?
Oh. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I get this question a lot because I work a lot with people that are just starting out in the program in Toronto. I'm sure Catherine does too. And people come to the program thinking that attendants are looking for different things. I've seen people post very short ads, very, very long ads. So I do tend to point people into a certain direction if I feel like they're struggling, and there's examples that I can send. But it's always good for people to add their own personality, their own needs, their own description of what they're looking for, and just being honest about that without obviously being too personally revealing in something that's going out to the public. I've seen some very creative, very fun ads that sort of invite people to apply if they're morning people, and I've seen other ads that are just short, quick, and get to the point, and people have had success with both of those. So it really depends on what you're looking for.
Okay, so I have a question. I think I understand what the question is, and I'm going to read it as it was written. But here we go. If my mom, who is 95, needs financial help, how can we get the help to hire a nanny? And I'm going to change that word maybe to PSW or support person in my home. It would kill her if she had to leave the home, but she cannot do any cooking and basic care for herself. Financially, she's unable to manage, financially she is able to manage her own money. So it sounds like the need for a PSW, and I guess you'd have to assess that. They're using the term nanny though.
Yeah. So
95-year-old.
Yeah, well, you know, we just had somebody start who's 93, so age ain't nothing but a number. Really, the eligibility criteria are the only things that we're looking at. No one's disqualified purely on the basis of age. The important thing to note about that relationship, though, is that this person is not a caretaker. The idea is that they are an employee of the self-manager who's providing assistance. So it's not somebody there to supervise someone or take care, as it were. It's somebody there who's following the specific direction of the self-manager to help them with their activities of daily living.
So not a companion.
Yeah. So things like all the things we mentioned before, as long as somebody needs assistance with that and they're able to direct an attendant and manage the employer responsibilities, then they would be a candidate for direct funding.
So just curious, and in a situation, let's say the 95-year-old in this case could not manage their own funding or their own monies, but family could, or a bookkeeper could. How would that work out?
On this program, that responsibility can't be transferred to another person. So if somebody weren't able to manage that part, this wouldn't unfortunately be the program for them. I don't know if there are other programs that they've tried to access and haven't, but typically people who cannot self-manage would be receiving delivered services from other sources.
Okay, so the individual who asked this question, if you need to get some further assistance on possible supports for this individual, don't hesitate to email me and I'll forward on to the right individual.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions online? The last question I think I had that came in to my email was just related to, again, back to the concern about the number of hours. So if somebody is receiving X number of hours from the Community Care Access or the LHINs, how do you manage the additional support, or is this all you would get, and how many hours on average again is somebody able to obtain with this funding?
Yeah, there's no real average just because every budget is completely individual. What I will say is that the way we go about hours versus, say, the LHIN is a bit different. So we ask somebody to propose what they need rather than coming in and making an assessment of what they need. So if somebody is receiving, for example, 1 hour a day through the LHIN, we wouldn't necessarily look at that and say, well, you're getting 1 hour there, that's what we'll offer. We would look at what are the needs throughout the day and how are we going to schedule attendance to cover them. It's very rare that somebody would receive less hours through direct funding than they would from another source.
Okay. And what are the insurance implications here? For example, if there's an accident with a transfer?
Melissa, do you want me to take that one?
Part of that would be where WSIB would come in. But people are also expected to have liability insurance. I mean, liability is part of their home or tenant insurance. So it sort of depends on how the accident occurred. I don't know, Catherine, do you want to, if there's anything I missed there, and pick up on?
Yeah, just that we do require every self-manager to have $2 million liability insurance, and we pay for the difference for people to bump from 1 million, which is what people typically have, to 2 million.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions right now. Does not mean that they won't come in later when people think about their questions. Oh, I just had one. I mean, what if a person who was cared for what if the person cared for had the accident? Okay, so not the individual providing the care, but the actual individual receiving the care has an accident? Is there any insurance implications there?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are insurance implications for if somebody got
So
injured?
let's say I'm providing care to Catherine. Somehow I drop you and you're injured. Does the insurance does that liability insurance cover me? I guess I think that's the concern is who is there any insurance should the individual who is being cared for get hurt? How does that, like, what if I'm assuming, and I'm going to ask this question to the asker, like, could I sue? Is that what you're looking at? Is could I go after the person who was caring for me? Are they covered for their own liability of maybe causing harm?
I have actually dealt with this question before. Because you're training the attendant, it is your responsibility to make sure they're trained effectively. We have many people on the program that are transferred by hires and other ways it does require some training. And you can have other attendants train attendants if that works better. But the responsibility and risk is on you to make sure that those people are trained properly because they are your employees. There is that.
So basically, if you're training them and something occurs, then of course the fact is that you have been the one to train them, then all these areas of concern should have been dealt with. Sorry, she was typing, so there's a few more pieces to this. So what she's getting at is the fact that in direct funding, the relationship changes in all kinds of ways. So you don't have a third party to resort to for these kinds of issues. So I'm wondering what's the implications of that relationship? So it opens it up to vulnerabilities. I understand. So I think I understand what the question here is.
Yeah.
If an individual is working for CCC and you have an issue with that worker, you go to your supervisor to manage that, right? What happens in cases where there is no manager? You're the manager.
Yeah, that's just it. I mean, it would be very difficult for a self-manager to win some sort of restitution from their own employee about the job that they've been hired to perform. But I want to connect this to the larger issue of like the risk and responsibility of being on direct funding. You know, you hire an employee, you train them well, life may happen, you know, but part of the idea of being on direct funding is that you do accept a certain amount of uncertainty about how things are going to unfold, and you accept responsibility for that. I've never really heard of a situation like that happen where an employee was so ill-trained or couldn't perform something such that a self-manager was seriously injured. But I do want to connect that to the bigger issue of, you know, the self-manager is responsible for managing the performance of an employee.
Right, and so part of the risk could be, the comment here is about there's vulnerability. So if an individual, you know, steals something from your home or doesn't show up and leaves you in a vulnerable state, I mean, those are the risks of not having a third party involved in your care.
Yeah.
Sorry, Catherine. So I want to go back to the transferring and possible action piece of it. When I said that's come up before, something I've addressed, it's come up an issue before someone got in the program. Once you're actually on direct funding and you realize like that you're training those attendants and specifically how you like to be transferred, if they're not following your instructions or if you feel vulnerable with this person, you can discuss it with them, and if need be, you can fire them. So while you can't sue them if they let you fall, if you feel like the person is putting you at risk, you can terminate their employment. That is an option that you have available to you. The same thing I would say is if you feel like the person may steal from you or has stolen from you. You can address that as an employer would. You have that power and control as an employer, and I would argue that actually puts you in more control in some cases than you may be with an agency, because you're not dealing with that third party. If you have an employee who's late, you can address that with them the first time. You can address it again if you need to. And if it continues, you can let that employee go. You don't have to continue hiring and having this person come into your home. Now, that does put some responsibility on that person to have a backup plan, but that's something we encourage all people on the program to do, to always have a couple of attendants in their back pocket who could work with them and fill in for shifts, because employees do get sick. But I mean, there's also the power that comes with knowing your attendants, knowing that you're the one that signs their paychecks, that they're not only they're accountable to you directly.
So the questions are coming in, ladies. So I'm just going to follow up, though, on what this current discussion is, and then I'll move on to these other two questions. Back to the resources of Direct Funding Ontario. Can you, as staff, be used as helpful, like troubleshooters as such? So if I have an issue with my attendant and I don't want it to escalate it, I want to keep this individual, there's just something that I need to discuss, can you be used as a bouncing board or staff on hand there to do so?
Yes.
Yes.
Catherine,
so again, yeah,
we do that with people regularly. We all do. We don't have case managers on the program, but I think each of us as staff with the direct funding program all work with people dealing with various challenges. That's not to say everyone on the program deals with difficult challenges. It's just, it is helpful to have that sounding board, especially when you're newer to hiring employees.
And people can also talk to other self-managers. We do have a network of people who sign up to be contactable by other people on the program. So you could even call somebody else on the program and talk to them about the experiences that you're having.
Okay, great. And are most employees paid by check, e-transfer, and other means? How do you pay these individuals?
Every employee is paid by check.
So it is always by check in general. That's what you
always
see.
Always by check, yeah.
Always by check. Okay. And I am so sorry, I do not know what the term RCV means. So ladies, you may know what RCV means, but if you presently RCV 1 hour per day, what type of person could you attract and hire for a measly 1 hour per day who isn't a PSW?
Receiving, I think that means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so, if you're receiving 1 hour a day.
Yeah.
I thought it was a term for some. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that is a good question. So building shifts is something tricky that normally people need a little bit of assistance with when they're preparing for an interview, because sometimes you just have a shift that's an hour and there's not much to do. So we would look at a few things. One, we would try to look at what other tasks are going on in the day that could maybe be added to that 1 hour shift and make it a little bit more more attractive, right? The other thing is that we would also encourage people to look for people who live reasonably close so that people aren't driving an hour to work an hour and leave for an hour. So if, for example, if you lived in an apartment building, maybe you would hire somebody in the building or a building nearby. We also have some ways of adding incentives onto short shifts. So for example, for an hour shift or anything shorter than that, we might add a travel premium. So just a few dollars to kind of bump the hourly rate of the shift up and make sure that somebody is able to attract someone for the shift.
I would also add that there are a great many people on the program who have short shifts like that and do manage to make them work. Yeah, well, what I was trying to say with that too is, often because you're scheduling your own attendance, if you know that one of your attendants is getting a lot of those short shifts, you can control how many hours they're getting. So at least, even if they're working short shifts, they're getting a reasonable number of hours during the week to make that shift attractive. And in hiring for that position, you may look specifically for people who are looking for that kind of flexibility in their lives. Like, for example, myself, I have a pretty short shift in the morning. It's only an hour and a half long, and it's at 6:30 in the morning. But the person I hired to do that on weekdays is a single parent who lives down the street from me and is back home in time to get her kid to school. So it worked out for her to make some money working with me, and then she can get her son off to school. Just something to think about. Just want to make sure everyone's still there because it got very quiet.
I'm still
I'm
here.
sorry, it's Angela.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I muted myself. Imagine that. There is another follow-up question about the checks.
Mhm.
So the question, I think that the misunderstanding is that the checks are coming from the individual who is the employer, not from the Center for Independent Living. So it is suggested by direct funding that the monies that the individual receives to pay their employee is provided to them as a check. Is that what you're telling us?
No. So the first payment that someone receives is by check, but subsequent deposits to the self-manager are directly to a bank account, but they pay their attendants by check.
That's what I'm getting at. So
Yeah.
they're paying their own attendant by check.
Mhm.
And the question, I guess, was, so it always has to be a check? Is that just so you have a trail when you're paying your attendant? Is it for just more protection? Why
Yeah.
can they not pay the individual by e-transfer or, I don't know, other means?
Yeah, because it's not as trackable. Because this is publicly funded money, there are some rules about how that money can be dispersed. It may change in the future. We don't necessarily know. The one exception to that is somebody using their bookkeeping fee towards a payroll service. If they choose to use a payroll service to do their payroll, then they can provide direct payments to their attendants. The downside of that, though, is that there typically isn't enough money left over to pay a bookkeeper, and a bookkeeper is really invaluable, especially with other aspects of being on the program, because it's not just payroll, it's reporting, it's doing taxes at the end of the year, it's doing the ROEs and the T4 summaries and all of that.
Okay. So if you're on direct funding and you just find out it's not working out for you, is it fairly easy or hard to revert back to community care or for the LINS service? Have you seen people having to switch back to the old system? And have they had difficulty with that?
Thankfully, we haven't seen that happen very much. Most people that come to our program come to it because they can see that what's with direct funding is going to work better for them. That's not to say that it wouldn't be an option for people should their ability to manage the program change. But of course, that would be dependent on the availability of the service they were looking to get back to, I guess.
Right. Okay. Well, it appears that the questions have stopped coming in. We have a little bit more time. Is there any last minute concerns, issues, something that you need to bring up that you forgot to earlier? Anything you want to end with, ladies? Not putting you on the spot. If you said all you need to say, that's all good.
Yeah, I can't really think of anything. I mean, I think Melissa touched on the big takeaway earlier, which is that you know, the switch to direct funding is a personal choice, and there's always going to be you know, a certain amount of risk and a certain amount of unknown. But we really think that with this program, the control a person has over managing those unknowns and kind of, you know, organizing them in their own lives is greater on this program. That's my main message.
Thank you. So I did have one last question. Sorry, Melissa, if I cut you off. If you have something to say, I'll leave that for you. But when our needs change, so when something shifts, how easy is it to change the funding? So can you increase or decrease depending on the need?
I'll let Melissa take that one.
All right, I will take that one. It really depends on the type of need that's changed. we do recognize that some disabilities are progressive, but we don't quite have some of the funding flexibility that bigger programs like the LIN or the CCAC might have. So if we're talking bigger changes to somebody's routine, it may take us longer to find a permanent arrangement for those. There is a waiting list for needs like that on our program, but while someone's sitting on that waiting list, we do our best to see that their person's needs can be met. I don't want to get too deep into the technicality, but if we know that somebody has a change in needs, we have some tools at our disposal to kind of help them meet that need until we can come up to a point of a permanent change.
Great.
But what I also wanted to say, to touch on Catherine's point a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, I'm on the direct funding program as well as working for the program, but I can tell you before that, I had agency delivered services coming to me before work, and people ask me all the time, well, isn't it stressful being on direct funding? You got to do paperwork. You got to keep in touch with your employees and rearrange your schedule and send out checks and keep in touch with your bookkeeper. And while there is that level of work involved, and definitely there's a bit of a learning curve, there's also support along that learning curve. And I'll tell you, the stress of dealing with direct funding is quite a bit less than the stress of wondering if anyone's going to show up for you to work, to get you out of bed and ready for your day, and to know who's coming to the door and know that they know you and know that your needs. That can be such a de-stressor that the amount of work involved is totally worth it.
Well, thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Catherine, for taking time this evening to speak to us. We had a good turnout on the line. For those who are still on the line listening to us, I will be sending out an email shortly with the recording as well as an evaluation. And if we're able to get access to the slides outside of the recorded portion, I will get those to you. So thank you. I trust you'd enjoyed tonight's presentation, and we will now sign off. All the best and have a good evening.
Thank you. You